These divers are preparing for an undersea adventure of a lifetime. To dive the Empress of Ireland is not for everyone. There are many intense stories to be told by those who have explored the wreck. Near zero temperatures, unpredictable currents, and little visibility make it a sight for only experienced and physically capable divers. Here veteran Andrea Doria diver Bart Malone suits up. Assistance to each diver, as he gets in and out of the water, is the key to a fluid operation. The most strenuous element for these divers will be the decompression stops. Icy cold water and exceptionally high currents intensify the long hang time while doing little but review the past 20 to 35 minutes. Nitrox or oxygen is recommended to reduce the exposure to the 32-degree water. Typical gear includes large volume doubles, optional nitrox and or oxygen, argon for dry suit inflation, high-powered lights, emergency ascent reels, cave reels, redundant Arctic regulator systems, decompression computers, and backup for everything above. By the time the typical wreck diver is dressed out in all this apparatus, he begins to look somewhat like a lunar landing vehicle.
The great Canadian wreck diver.
The wreck diver.
Who doesn't have enough gear.
Doesn't have enough lights by the looks of it.
Lights are an important gear item for wreck diving of this nature. Some divers have designed intricate arrangements for their personal lighting systems. We set up our dive camp 15 minutes east of Rimouski at this small town of St. Luce. From the front door we can see 4 miles offshore the Quebec salvage vessel Jesmere, moored over top of the wreck site of the Empress. And just a few miles away stands the Pointe-à-Pierre lighthouse. To get to the wreck site, we would leave from Rimouski aboard a dive vessel that has come all the way from Kingston, owned and operated by George and Sue from the Duck Dive Lodge of Point Traverse. On another occasion, we were transported by another vessel, the Samuel de Champlain, from Quebec City. Both these vessels are a comforting thought over the stories I've heard from the Empress of Ireland Historical Society. For years, Steve Brooks, Ray Stewart, and Mark Reynolds journeyed to the Empress by Zodiac. They often found the wreck by using their depth gauges suspended on a line, as the marker was not always visible. They geared up in less than ample room and learned to cope with the sometimes 15-foot rollers that swell between dives. They challenged the fog and freezing weather and not always beat the tide's recession on return, having to unload gear and then race off to fill tanks for the next morning. It was an exhausting endeavor. Bedtime came around midnight, but the call of the Empress would instill the excitement and energy needed to greet the 6 a.m. alarm and catch the early tide for another day's exploration. Ray Stewart, one member of that hardy group, has countless tales of adventurous dives. He and longtime dive buddy Steve Brooks together have done about 260 dives on the Empress. They say they have seen only a small portion of the wreck, and they still enthusiastically take the plunge. Every good dive has a plan, and as the diver prepares for his visit to the Empress, he explains.
Going? I'm following Darren down. He's my buddy. We're going into first-class dining room to get to the pantry. Take a look around there.
Where you going, Darren?
Where am I going? First-class dining.
How long are you going to stay there? Too long.
Too long, yeah.
Would you like a menu, sir?
Long enough to get cold. That is going to be a coarse rope, about that size diameter, okay, which is supposed to be going up to the lift bag, and they've cut it now.
Before we follow the divers to the cryptic wreck of the Empress, let us review some of her history. In 1904, the Canadian Pacific Railroad decided to tackle the competition for transatlantic crossing head-on. It employed the Fairfield Shipping Company of Scotland to build the sister ships, the Empress of Britain and the Empress of Ireland. Both ships were designed and built to Class 100A1, which meant that they were scrutinized and endorsed by Lloyd's at all stages from the drawing board to sea trials. The sisters made their maiden voyages within weeks of each other, and with the design speed of 20 knots, made the crossing from Liverpool to Quebec consistently in 6 days, setting a new standard of speed and passenger comfort practically overnight. The Empress was a twin-screw steamer of 14,000 tons, 550 feet long, and drew 27 feet of water loaded. She could carry 1,550 passengers, 300 in first class, 450 in second class, and 800 in third class. She gained the reputation for being steady in the worst Atlantic weather. The Empress had an unchallenged reputation for solid comfort. CPR was obsessive about passenger safety. The Empress carried ample lifeboats and practiced extensive crew training and drills. On board were 16 steel lifeboats, 20 Engelhart collapsibles, and 4 collapsible berth-on boats. There were 2,200 life jackets on board. Her passenger allowance was not limited by the number of berths, but by the capacity of her lifeboats. She was designed to float with any 2 compartments flooded. She had a complex system of watertight doors and bulkheads. 10 bulkheads divided the ship into 11 more or less watertight compartments, more or less because they were pierced at one level or another by no fewer than 24 watertight doors, giving working access from one compartment to another. Navigation drills were a routine occurrence on the Empress as well. Despite the costly and diligent safety precautions taken in her design and management, the Empress now lies in 150 feet of water, 8 miles east of Rimouski, Quebec. Human error, the one uncontrollable factor to blame. Captain Anderson of the Norwegian collier Storstad and his officers faced the Canadian Court of Inquiry, which was formed immediately after the collision. The first officer of the Storstad, who had been at the helm at the time of impact, was found to be negligent in the matter. The Norwegian Maritime Court later absolved the officers of the Storstad from all responsibility of the accident. The Storstad was built upon what is known as the Isherwood system. Instead of the ribs being arranged vertically from keel to deck, her main frames ran horizontally from stem to stern. With 11,000 tons of coal under her hatches, she reached a full 25 feet below the surface. These factors made her immensely strong. The collier pierced the Empress like a knife, burying her nose amidships in the steamer. The Empress sank in 14 minutes. The crew of the Storstad did everything humanly possible to rescue those who had survived the sinking. All those that were pulled from the water were taken to Rimouski to a makeshift hospital by the 2 mail carriers, the Lady Evelyn and the Eureka, which had come to the rescue. All those who had survived, and many, many more who did not. The dead were often unidentifiable. Bodies were sometimes claimed by more than one party, and many bodies went unclaimed altogether. Attempts at salvage were made almost immediately. On the first dive, the Empress claimed another victim when the team's chief diver slipped off the hull of the wreck. The silver bullion was eventually recovered, and the Canadian Post Office was happy to recover the ship's mail, as the sodden mail bags contained a substantial amount of money. All but 2 of the 200 bags of registered mail were recovered. The original envelopes shown here are now called wreck covers and hold a substantial value to collectors today. Excitement and possible rewards instill the courage necessary to brave the depths and cold dark waters in the early years of underwater exploration. Today's diver has advanced equipment, technical training, and the courage to explore those same depths and cold dark waters. The excitement and possible rewards are still there. The divers enter the hull through the explosion hole blasted in 1914. Through there, they enter into the first-class dining room, which at one time was quite elegant and ornate. Now all that remains are the bases and brass bolts that held the tables and chairs to the deck. Carrying on through the dining room, the divers come to the first-class pantry, with its distinct solid bronze serving table. Also still prevalent in the first-class pantry is the black and white ceramic tile flooring. Beneath the serving table are columns of now empty plate racks. First-class cabins were all very decorative, with dressers complete with sinks and chamber pots in each. A swim through first-class cabins reveals nothing but openness, as all the walls have crumbled to the bottom starboard side of the wreck. One can still find, though, the odd dresser with sink fastened securely. The nursery and children's pantry is also accessible at this deck level. This area meets the forward wall of the bridge facing the bow. Remainders of portholes can be found there. A chair, and another crumbled dresser with broken sink. The grand staircase, in its time, was a beautiful piece of craftsmanship. Now all that remains of the staircase is the corner post and last step. Time and salt water have taken their toll on what was once a magnificent beauty. This photo of third-class dining room shows a more common look to the decor, such as the rough beams on the ceiling. Here we see diver Steve Brooks entering the hatchway to third-class dining room. Note the technique of good buoyancy control and no fin movement that could stir up a cloud of silt, reducing visibility to nil. The rough beams in the ceiling are still notable here. Table bases and a staircase at the end of the room leads to the deck above. The second-class dining room with its separate table arrangement is collapsing rapidly. What we were able to film here was a second-class pantry with its solid bronze serving table. We find that the manufacturer's name is still engraved in the side of the lid. Next to the plate racks, there is a lone broken plate embalmed in the rust. As the wreck collapses, all of these artifacts will be lost. It's just a matter of time. A diver exits the explosion hole with an artifact. A first-class dinner plate that was lost amongst the debris. Following views are of rooms that will never be seen again. An entranceway to the promenade deck. The music room with skylight. The writing room. The gentleman's game room. The library. And a sitting room off of a first-class cabin. All of these beautiful and ornate first-class auxiliary areas were on the top 2 decks of the Empress. Those 2 decks are completely collapsed, either onto the main deck or onto the river bottom. Proof positive that the St. Lawrence and her mighty currents will soon diminish what remains of the Empress of Ireland. After their exciting excursion to the Empress, the divers must decompress in sometimes 12-knot currents. This is a sacrifice they must make for their enjoyment, for it is usually not a pleasant wait in a near 32-degree water that exists. As they decompress, their colleagues on the surface can hear their breathing through the oxygen regulator that is supplying the helpful decompressing gas through long hoses to the stage stops. How Wood spends his time between dives is of his own choosing.
Soon, we dive! What now? First, we dive! Hey!
Ernie the Seal, we believe, is a first-class resident of the Empress. We hope not to meet up with him in his bedroom. Barry the Beluga, while on holidays, was not nearly as interested in us as we were of him. Another frequent pastime is to reflect on the past and examine the artifacts brought up on a previous dive. A perfectly intact first-class teapot. All earthenware bears the CPR emblem. Portholes are sometimes found with glass intact. Medicine bottles, such as this Listerine bottle. A-cups stored on their wooden keeper. All earthenware was made at Minton of England. And a trumpet, a rare find in poor condition. Many other artifacts on exhibit at the Musée de la Mer in Rimouski, Quebec, help to tell the story of the Empress of Ireland. Those divers that visit the Empress in a resting place give the wreck existence in today's world. Until time and the St. Lawrence River make it impossible, there will be those who venture to quench their thirst for the thrill and satisfaction of her exploration.